First of all, I would like to introduce to Mario Campolargo, former director from the DIGIT in the European Commission, also Secretary of State for Digitalization and Administrative Modernization of Portugal, and external member of the Gaia-X Board of Directors and visiting directors of the University of Aveiro. Mario, welcome. Second, Ana García Robles, who is Secretary General of BDVA, Big Data Value Association. Welcome as well. Juanjo Hierro, founder of Simware and chairman of the Fireware Technical Steering Committee. Juanjo, welcome as well. While Juanjo is also joining the stage, we have also several members and several panelists joining online. Barry Betjens, who is online, Director of Innovation at TNO and board member of ITSA and Gaia-X. Welcome, Barry. Catherine Simonin, Tech Lead for Trust and Innovation Governance at Orange and Gaia-X board member. And Kai Menke, who is founder of Delta DAO and Gaia-X board member as well. Welcome you all. So this session is about how data can secure Europe's competitiveness and sovereignty. And it was back in 2022 when the Digital Decade Policy Framework was approved to guide European Union digital transformation aligned with European Union values: human centricity, competitiveness, sovereignty, and sustainability. And we are meeting today at a very special moment. We are at the midpoint of the digital decade. We have effectively finished season 1, if this could be a series, a season defined by writing the rules and establishing concept. As Alberto was mentioning before, we have a set of comprehensive regulation which has been approved in the recent years. And now we are entering in season 2, where the European data economy must become the true driver of prosperity and quality of life. And we are at the moment where we are no longer talking about theory. We are all about execution, growth, and survival with responsibility. And in the geopolitical context, we have several changes. We have seen all the diagnoses from the 2 Draghi reports. It served us also as a reality check. Europe faces a productivity gap compared to our global competitors, and without massive investment and crucial scale, our relevance, our values, and quality of life are at risk. So this brings us to our core topic, which is the sovereignty. And sovereignty is not just a buzzword, and it's not about being totally isolated or protectionism, but it's also about ensuring that we create our necessary autonomy and freedom to defend our values. So the goal is to explore how actually, in this session, we are going to explore how actually we can lever sovereignty to lever competitiveness. So it's a way to find and to secure our assets without losing our values, and what we can call the European way, and ensuring we don't fall behind in this global race. So the dynamics of these sessions today is very practical. So we are going to first talk about the diagnostics and why, despite our efforts, we are struggling in some phases of the business landscape. And also we're going to talk about defining the next action points. How do we make sure that in the coming years, sovereignty and competitiveness, it's actually a fact and not just a policy goal? To talk about this, we have all these distinguished panelists, and I'm going to start first with Mario Campolargo. Mario, you have been at the kitchen of the European Commission. You have been supporting and driving the creation of these policies. So could you reflect on the diagnosis of where we are at the digital decade today, and what do you think are the most impactful actions on the last years? And if you could go back and change one decision from this season one, what do you think it would be the one?
Good morning, everybody. Ruth, thank you very much. It was very nice to see Dani and to see Alberto. Thanks for the interesting presentations. When I look back to this period, I want to make a very important distinction that somehow was, I think, alluded already by Alberto, is that in the last decades we produced a lot of significant and substantial set of regulations. I mean, Europe has been seen as a global trendsetter, and in some cases with the Brussels effect actually working significantly. And it remains to be just referred names like GDPR or DSA or DMA, or more recently the AI Act to show this evidence. But geopolitical tensions, or if we take it more, geoeconomic tensions, that's what seems to be driving geopolitics at this moment in time, as well as a disturbed, non-stable global competition, made actually Europe move from the previous state to a stage that is more capacity building, capability building in terms of industrial terms. And three words I think have come across in this context. One is sovereignty, we already discussed it a bit here, is aspects of security and competitiveness. You know, Alberto said it, I mean, but it's very good to remind all of us of this. This should not be seen as a contradiction with previous line of thinking and acting. This means the ethos, the human-centric ethos of Europe should maintain. What is important is now to complement it with the geopolitical and industrial imperative. So it's this more awareness. And here you see already something that I guess that we, as Europe, and myself being in the kitchen of the European Commission, probably, although maybe we have seen it coming, we have not seen the significant impact of that. I'm going to say it a bit late, but it's like if in Europe, in several sectors, not necessarily only in the digital, we saw ourselves as making value out of consuming technology rather than driving the production of technology. You gave a very good example. It may not be acting always in driving digital in all sectors, but even when we use it, we need to be the drivers of using it with purpose, of making sure that these industrial sectors change because of the use of this technology. And this new imperative can be seen on the omnibus. You also mentioned that. And I think that can be seen on the huge effort. Let's be also transparent on that. Driven by the example of the COVID, of massive investments that Europe is doing in AI gigafactories, just as an example of that. Now you tell me, what could have changed? I mean, well, let's look at 4 or 5 of the vulnerabilities of Europe. One of them is the fragmentation. I mean, OECD, Court of Auditors, all of them say this. The Draghi reports also say that. 27 digital markets. Even in terms of the previously logic of regulation, the digital jurisdictions in Europe are multiple. They diverge on the implementation speeds, on some of the standards, administrative capacities, etc. And again, it was said already, with very high costs in some cases for the compliance costs. Slow adoption of this notion of data enablement, especially in SMEs. Look at the reports, the recent reports, and we see the very low number of people, of SMEs that are using data or artificial intelligence. And this when we know that 99% of the tissue of Europe in terms of economic is from SMEs. Look also into the very low availability of sovereign solutions on cloud. I mean, we use 70% in Europe of the hyperscalers, and here the investment of the high-performance joint undertaking, and in Spain you have a lot of significant actors in this domain, like the Barcelona Supercomputer Center and others. And Gaia X plays, I love it, Gaia X, they play a very important role because, in fact, Gaia has to move from this season 1, as you say, to the season 2, that is implementation. I mean, the funding is abundant, but it's complex. And above all, what I think that the funding in Europe and maybe in some member states is not good is because it lacks continuity. You know, you lead one project in one area. First, there is a plethora of projects. I mean, some of them, competing with each other. But the next phase, you don't preserve this continuity that is important. And this affects, for example, the critical mass of the ecosystems. So, in some sense, going back to your question, we have done a first season 1 defining the rules. The real challenge is now the adoption. And in the area of data, we need to make sure that the business value of sharing data is better understood by a lot of actors. If there isn't a critical mass of actors, in particular SMEs, that understand the value of sharing data, then we don't have the network effect. And to be honest, data economy and data spaces leave out of the network effect. So, as I said before, let's not think just of Europe as consumers, but we have to put our focus on producing the strategic digital infrastructure that is an infrastructure of power, is an infrastructure that will preserve our economy and ultimately our democracies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Mario. Very well thought about the policy reflections. Now I'm going to go with Kai, who is joining us online. Kai, welcome. Could you represent the agile SMEs who are building and creating digital services? Could you also reflect from your perspective on this season 1, and what do you think has worked well, what not so well? What do you think are the biggest challenges right now at this, for the small European companies competing with global giants? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. It's always difficult to follow up after Mario, but I will do my best. So what worked well? We laid a strong foundation here. And we did it at the right time because, make no mistake, Europe's system, our democratic values and our digital supply chains, they are in fact under attack or at least threatened. So what did work well in season 1? We created the right organizations for governance, for open source software communities, like, for example, GaiaX. We created the right software that was not available before, and we improved it. We now have the awareness. That took years to understand the situation in which we are and also take responsibility for it. That was a long process, right? We have amazing talent and capable people who are now skilled in what we are doing here, building this data economy in a new way. That's a fantastic outcome of season 1. And we created the first ecosystems which provide the foundation for scaling. But that brings us later to season 2. We share the same language now, the same definitions. So now we can talk across all European builders. Fantastic. Onboarding to data spaces now just takes minutes or a day. That was not imaginable just years ago, right? So huge progress. The timing is right, but it's a difficult situation. So what did we learn and where do we need to improve to make this work right now? So we learned a hard lesson. Public funding alone will not sustain these ecosystems if they are not grilled for efficiency. It's easy to overlook efficiency once public money is flowing, but to build a sustainable business ecosystem, efficiency is really key. And we also learned that national and domain-specific platforms will have a hard time to scale, to get to the desired network effects. What we need is a digital single market, not 27 fragmented initiatives or 150. We need to build cross nations, cross companies, cross domains. That will make it a lot easier, and that's just the characteristics of the European market. And that said, let me look at the SMEs. You just said it. 99%, more than 90% are SMEs. They are the fast movers. They are also the majority of data consumers and data suppliers. Looking at the data market study, the recent one, we have roughly 1 million companies in Europe doing just that, but we need to connect them to an open ecosystem and not to fragmented silos. That is really key. What we learned is that those small and medium enterprises, they have been the movers, the shakers, the fast innovators. They have been taking a lot of risk going into this direction, and we need to support them. So what is needed? European procurement, that we trust these companies, that we learn a bit from the US how to fund these companies and support them, because it's not an even playing field. It's not a fair playing field. We have different starting points, and we need to make up for that to enable our SMEs. Because if we do not build these ecosystems for SMEs, but just for a few large companies, I think we will not fail. We will just replicate a model where we can't win. So our SMEs are fantastic. They exceed in speed, in efficiency, in risk-taking and innovation. So that is what is needed to move this needle forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kai. Very inspiring, very interesting topics, both from Mario talking about moving from consumer to production, and from Kai talking about awareness and building this truly digital single market. So continuing with Juanjo. Juanjo, you've been on the open source community for a long period. Could you reflect also from your standpoint on the season 2 and the season 1, and what do you think is the context of the geopolitical threats, and what are the thoughts? What are your thoughts about open source and this current situation?
Yes, thank you, Ruth, and by the way, thank you also for the organization GAIA-X Spain to invite me to this distinguished panel. Okay, if we think about the last decade, we have been experiencing multiple digital waves, digital revolutions. And I think it's worth reflecting what has happened, because in some of these waves, Europe has done very well, but not in others. If we think about Web 1.0, when web was created, this changed radically the landscape, is when companies became visible on this new ecosystem that was the internet, and all these concepts of business to business, business to consumer, interaction channels, digital channels were developed. When we think about Web 2.0 is when all these social networks, platforms, Facebook, Twitters, and all of this kind, now Instagrams and so on, have been developed. We have also have a third wave based on what I would qualify as smart solutions for different domains and combining IoT, big data, and so on and so forth. Now, has someone reflected why Europe did well in Web 1.0 or in this last, wave of combining IoT, big data, and so on, and did not so well in Web 2.0? The answer is open source. If you think what happened in the first web revolution, and unfortunately many policymakers do not know this, because nobody has told them, is there was something called LAMP. Do people know what LAMP means? Probably the technical people in the audience know very well. LAMP is the acronym of Linux, MySQL, PHP, Apache. That brought a technology stack with which SMEs and integrators, which are kind of the companies that where we are strong in Europe, were able to go and say, I can use this and make business out of it, serve my customers, and so on and so forth. This didn't happen. There was nothing like LAMP in Web 2.0 that was dominated by the big players, the hyperscalers, bringing their platform that is proprietary and not visible. So now we are talking about creating the infrastructures for this data economy. So the point is, if we make sure this infrastructure is developed as open source, then Europe will have better chances to compete. That's the point. If we leave this as something that, technologies to be used will be brought by each company on a proprietary basis and so on and so forth, we are not good in that game. Let's face it. So the point is, should we just wait if something like LAMP will happen spontaneously, as it happened in Web 1.0? Europe was able to succeed, but we were lucky. Let's be frank. So I think Europe, in that sense, have to take the step, as Mario was mentioned before, of trying to drive things to say, okay, we know, but do it with a purpose, knowing that we will be good, we can compete if we create a technology background, a backbone based on open source. And we try to drive this in the right direction. Now, the last comment I want to make on that respect is that, of course, there is something that needs to be also known about how open source work. And open source work in a way that only the right technology really succeed. I mean, when you bring a piece of shit and make it available on GitHub and as open source, this doesn't work. People will not take it. So it has to be the right open source. And in that respect, and to finalize my intervention, we are a bit concerned about precisely that aspect, because there are currently different open source initiatives developing in the data space and with different vision. And some of them, some people in the audience may know what I'm talking about. I don't want to mention explicit names, but some of them are advocating for a vision where data spaces and the data economy is only about exchanging data among organizations. And that, in our opinion, is wrong. It's that, but also the way applications exploiting that data, like AI services and so on, will be made available in an ecosystem. Therefore, the right open source infrastructure to be put in place need to enable this second vision. And that's with this a bit the two things, the two ideas that I want to bring. Use open source as a competitive weapon, but make sure the right open source approach is taken.
Thank you, Juanjo. Thank you very much. I'll go then. I will go to Catherine Simonin. Catherine, you're probably speaking from the view of a large European company infrastructure as Orange. Could you also reflect on this season one and what it means for large European companies, and more specifically also as a cloud provider in the past years, what has been the biggest break to deploying European infrastructure so far?
Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for the questions. Orange Business is today a data space participant offering trust, sovereign, cloud, and data infrastructure, as well as sovereign services such as wallet, consent management, and also GenAI tools. We are part of several data spaces at different phases of their life. We have seen that the data space governance mentioned previously is key to succeed, but it takes time to set up. And as it's a transformation, new technology, it takes time also for every actors to change their mindset. Often, after the 3 years funding, the data space is not able to have a sustainable business plan. It takes time to demonstrate the business value, because it takes time to reach the size in transformation technologies. It's always the same. So when the public funding ends, the data space could face a very difficult time. Public funding is key to start, but I think, my personal point of view, that a public procurement will also help to go on till the sovereign value is proven and the business plan becomes mature enough. I also think what was said previously is perfectly right, and even if Orange is a huge company, we are also using the open source tools. We are used to use LAMP a long time ago, and we have an open source, a wide open source program. We think that sovereignty is autonomy to choose, autonomy to change tools, and so I fully agree with what was said previously. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks. So sovereignty is also about interoperability and avoid vendor locking. That's what you're also mentioning. That's very interesting, this topic as well. Anna, let's go with you. You are representing the innovation system through the Big Data Value Association. Could you also reflect on season 1 and your perspective on what has happened, and what do you think about the innovation ecosystem so far in this season?
So thank you, Ruth, and I have to also thank IX Spain for inviting me here, and I'm so happy that I'm surrounded by pioneers in the data economy in Europe, and that's going to be my first comment. We are talking about season 1, season 2, and for me we are in probably season 6 or something. No? And again, I think both Mario and Juanjo, we've been talking about the data economy for more than 5 years. So I think this is an important element that many of the foundations, because I will say now what I think it has been done in the last 5 years. It has been done thanks also to a lot of previous work and knowledge and learnings from the past. And actually some of my reflections have to be what I already saw 10 years ago and how much we have evolved from 10 years ago. So now if I look at the positive and things that we need to improve, first allow me to share some data with you that for us, for the community, was quite interesting when we were reflecting on the data union strategy. And this comes for the regular reports that companies like IDC produces for the European Commission, and our European data market is growing. So it's very good news. And for instance, from the 23 to the 24, there was a growth of the 10%. It's not too bad, and it's actually good. It's just others grow quicker. And China grows almost close to the 40%, 40. The States is not so, it's closer to us, it's 18%. But okay, yeah, you say we are running behind, but our market is growing. But you know where we are number 1, that was really shocking, in data suppliers. Could you believe that? So actually the market of data suppliers is growing in Europe quicker than in any other place in the world. However, the data market that we generate is not as quick, which means that we will really need to improve our capacity to generate value for Europe of the data that we are making available in Europe. And that's, for me, a key aspect of the data sovereignty, okay? That it's not only that we have control, but really that all that value reverts in different ways in Europe. So that's the first comment that I wanted to highlight. Then what has worked well, or what I see really in these 5 years, and also connected with the role of organizations like IIX, IDSA, and others, and the whole topic of data spaces, is really the tech to work in a digital ecosystem, in an ecosystem perspective, that now works. There are many different solutions. Still, there is a lot to do in interoperability, but there is a tech that works and is showing that open innovation can scale. That's actually, I mean, I've been almost 20 years with open innovation, and before it was, I talked with Juanjo, and let's talk, I mean, the process of efficiency that Kai was talking about before, it was very long to go for the idea to the pilot, and almost impossible to go for from a pilot to scale. And now there is a tech that allows to all these things very, very quick. Of course, again, there are strong issues still of interoperability and making sure that there is overall European and global governance on this, but I think this is a very positive thing. Another positive thing, and I contrast the positive what I think is missing, definitely in the last few years we had the moment of data, a moment that probably we are not going to have in decades, in investments, in focus, at the European, at national level. There was a lot of money, there was a lot of focus, everybody was talking about data, everybody was talking about data spaces, and the whole topic of the data economy has reached corners where this was not there before. What probably we didn't do so well, and this is related to the fragmentation that Mario was saying before. I mean, different member states have invested at very different levels. The investment, for instance, here has been super high. You go to other countries that have done very little, and actually because the wave of data spaces has passed, so to speak, from the big investment. So no, that's already gone, no, nothing to do. No. So you see countries with many different levels of investment, and not the best coordination between European and national initiatives, I would say. So, and we have a lot to do there because there are so many investments and things going on that will end soon, that if we don't connect them in between Europe and national initiatives, it will be money that probably is not, will not create any outcomes. And let me, just to give the floor to others, because I could speak for hours here. Let me, because I also, when preparing for this, I was looking at what has happened 10 years ago, 11 years ago, because I have it's not a feeling, I have the evidence that we are repeating and repeating. So 10 years ago, there were fantastic projects, use cases in Europe related to the same value chains that we are building now, with evidence that there was efficiency for companies, that we were creating data value chains, that there were efficiencies, environmental efficiencies, that this needs to fly, no? But it didn't fly, and that has to be a lot with the step from how companies go from innovative projects to really big investments, but I'm not going to enter that. But let me tell you something. I will put you an example of something also a bit linked to the policies, because in BDBA we work very close to the European Commission in implementing the policies that the Commission does, so the community works in all the projects to implement that. No, a bit like Gaia does with Spain. So I was looking at one of the initiatives that are very connected to BDBA, the Smart Data Innovation Lab. Some of you might know it in Karlsruhe, and many of the large companies in Europe. And sorry, I'm using a German initiative. I know I'm in Spain, I'm Spanish, but in that way I don't need to point anyone. But the interesting part of this initiative, if you read it, what they wrote in 2014, is the same things we are talking about. To bring industrial players to, start, at that time was experimenting with data sharing, with big data, smart data, AI. And if you read the things, it's a bit the same story, right? I remember that model we took as a reference to incubate this model all over Europe. And actually, many people here are pioneers in that model to help companies to innovate with data. But after a few years, this model, something else was, there are waves, okay, we invest 3 years for this, but now something is pop-ups, and then now is the digital innovation hubs, now is the AI factories, but the organizations behind and the mindset behind is a bit the same. So I think we felt a bit inconsistency in believing our own, what 10 years ago we were saying, keep it investing, consistency with that, very consistently. And I think this is something that we really need to look at the future. Myself, I'm very much in contact with the whole factories, gigafactories, and all this. We might talk about that later. And I see the same potential challenge, that this is a 3-year kind of wave. and then, something else will pop up later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Very interesting. I many times in my interventions, I start mentioning about like the importance of the data economy, which in Spain is 4% of GDP, and that it's an economy which is growing in double digit for the last couple of years, which was like coming from the European data study, and it's coming. So you are right. We have many positive things, and there are also some very interesting insights that you are providing as coordination of investments, consistency, that are really important to take note. Last but not least, I will go with Barry Bedgens. You are joining us from your experience on standards and research. So what are your reflections from season 1, and how do you think standards and research are supporting the data economy so far?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me on the panel. I'm happy to contribute. Of course, there's a lot has been said already. I must say I recognize many of the points made. From the research and development part and the standards and interoperability part, let me first say what went well, and I think this was already stated, that the technology part of data spaces and data sovereignty, we made huge steps in Europe in season 1. We have technical building blocks, we developed and specified functionality, we have connectors, labels, clearinghouses, and we actually showed that this technology can work, which I think is really, really impressive. And we've done that by creating many pilots, also funding many pilots across Europe. I looked at an inventory made in the Netherlands. We have around 47 initiatives, data sharing initiatives, which is a lot, and it generates a whole ecosystem of businesses, suppliers, vendors, also integrators around it. And so that's really good. We also created a lot of reference code available to actually work with data space technology. And Europe funded the Simple, but also Eclipse Foundation has been very, very instrumental in creating community for open source. And even on the standards thing, we've been moving forward quite well. And standards obviously take a long time. So it takes a few years to get specifications embedded into a standard. But on the data spaces, we're actually looking quite good on getting our views embedded in ISO standards. And of course, Europe is also helping with the harmonized standards, which are going to be supported, are certified by CENELEC. And so I think on the technological part, we've made huge progress. But there's also a but, because I think data spaces are not just technology, and we're really facing, in our point of view, an innovation gap. So the technology is available, but it does have difficulties scaling. And that also partly has to do with the way we approached the development of the data spaces, by focusing a lot on the technology first, making sure that it can happen. But it also has to be a business-wise proposition. And that lasting perspective of value is very difficult to define yet. I think Catherine also said that there is a gap to be from the business outlook for most data spaces is still very, very how do you call bristle. It's hard to make it last. And that's also because the data space itself doesn't generate actual value in the perception of most people. It's a means to an end. It's a different way to get access to data, to share your data. And that proposition, and that requires scale, and it requires a broad uptake to flourish. And that's still a challenge that we're gonna face. Another thing that's also important is the data spaces are not something that are just that are just new environments. There are existing environments in most industries. And migrating from one way to deal with data to another one is actually very complex. And that is something that we're going to have to address as well. If you're in a greenfield situation, it's actually now pretty simple to create a data space. But in a brownfield situation, moving from one state to another still requires quite a bit of effort. And that bit of effort is also perceived as a burden. We see that and we recognize that. And so working on that value proposition and making that better is also something that needs attention. Last one, I think, looking at sovereignty, data is just one piece of the puzzle, because the sovereignty requires more layers of the stack. So with data sovereignty, you only have one layer of the stack, but you also need cloud sovereignty, you need AI sovereignty, network sovereignty. And we've also seen that, for instance, in Gaia X, that we've made lots of progress on the data side, but the cloud side was actually more difficult to address. So we're not done yet and just scratching the surface of integrating the whole stack. And I think that for R&D in the future, that's going to be a real challenge to make sure that we address also the other layers of the stack in conjunction with the data layer.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you so much. So we just finished the first round of all the panelists and speakers. I'm going to go with the second round, the second and final one. In the interest of time, I'd like everybody to stick to the 3 minutes for this one. So I think there's been already very, very interesting points. Mario, in your first point, you were talking about the driving the technology, like the season 1 and season 2, where it's not a contradiction, but it's a complementary of the sessions, and that the challenge is on adoption. So what do you think is needed to drive this challenge and to succeed on this season 2? And what do you think specific actions could be done from policymakers and from the economy and the society in general to materialize the data economy and to turn data spaces into actual assets from European value?
So thank you again, and I think that the answer is already referred previously by some of the speakers. I mean, and I'll pick 1 or 2 points of them. So just to talk now about Barry, that gave an indication of how technology has been mature, how standards have been. This is very important, because without this standardization and this trust in the technology and the ability to do it, you cannot flourish a data economy. But I think that the fate of this season 2 of the Future Coming has to do with the global position of Europe, and in particular, as somebody said before, in the domain of AI. I like what was referred by you on this aspect of Europe being a leader in data supply, provision, but not being at all a leader in data markets. So the question when you think about, and I also agree very much with Juanjo, that is not just, we are not just here to try to foster exchange of data or interoperability of data or data spaces or whatever. I mean, for what is this? And if it is for data economy, then the question is what Europe wants to do in this amazing domain of, and I quote it quite generally, of artificial intelligence without limiting it. So do we want to compete with what was generated by the Web 2.0, proprietary, big platforms, American ones, social networks, etc., that have all the data of the world provided by every one of us, free of charge, without having a second thought about what we provide? And out of which they actually built some empires, and again, it was referred before, empires that may us to live or to govern our society out of algorithms that are trained with our data and that are private algorithms. Can we compete with this long advance that they have? Or should we find an alternative way? If I just pick on the aspects of, we have data supply, we are good and open, we have Gaia X and standards putting on that, we could probably focus our attention on the vertical AI. I mean, in industrial terms, we have most of the data in Europe and under our own control. Let me refer also about public administration, because I'm very connected to this sector. We actually have the trust, I hope, of the citizens to keep all the data that are providing, and this is amazing data to create vertical AI. And let me pick up on what Catherine says. We cannot be naive. If we really want to make sure that we understand the global game of competition, fair or unfair competition, of geopolitical, we have to use the public procurement as an instrument to help our industry to move, our SMEs to be able to trust. For SMEs, I think, and Kai, you are here, you probably correct me, but apart from all this standardization in terms of semantic, technical, and governance, etc., what SMEs are probably looking is, can we provide them with AI as a service or data as a service, but that are actually platforms that are trusted according to our values? Are we able to help? And this is not patronizing the SMEs, it's actually giving them the instruments to then make sense about the data. And we need definitely to invest more in infrastructure. I mean, Alberto said that infrastructure and Manuel Castells referred this, is an instrument of power, so we need to have our own infrastructure. Now, this is not an easy game, guys. We believe that we are investing massively in gigafactories, but every single of the big platforms, NVIDIA's being providers, Microsoft's of this world, Google's of this world, they invest enormously. And while we have preoccupation in terms of sustainability of environment, I'm not sure that others have. So there is a big challenge for all of us. But in my view, the point is, like Catherine says, use public procurement, give to the SMEs this perspective of deployment, help on the human competencies that is absolutely fundamental, and try to build an AI economy that is enough distinct from the generative, general AI-based platforms to really exploit and give value to Europe and let the value be here for our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you very much. Let's go back then to Kai. Kai, you were mentioning before about like what has worked well, and also about the need of the digital single market. Recently, the European Commission published the Digital Omnibus, and part of this new regulation and proposal is to support the European SMEs. What do you think is needed for this season? What do you believe? How do you believe these changes are a real effective improvement? And what else beyond regulation is needed?
Thank you. Very dynamic panel. I will change my content accordingly. So first of all, the digital omnibus. Less bureaucracy and more legal clarity, less entry barriers are generally good. So that's a point well made, and hopefully it will be the same when implemented. However, I'm still afraid that the omnibus creates or might create another moving target, because we just adjusted to one regime. Now we need to go for the next, and that's difficult for smaller organizations. But the potential is there. However, will our companies benefit from this the same like, for example, US, very large companies? I have doubt it will be the same, because others have already the network and scale effects, and they might be the main benefiters of this. And that might not help us. So it's too early to call a verdict on the omnibus, right? It's really fresh, but I'm slightly worried if we do not move in the right direction, support our local industries, it might not be to our advantage in the end. And on the second part, what is needed, I'd like to pick up what Juanjo just said, the right tools. Because we design consequences here, real economic consequences. We decide, and you said it, Europe is supplying data and is a leader there. But what we decide here is where the value is created, where it is captured, and how it is being shared. We create large socio-economic ecosystems here which need incentive designs, right? And if we fail to do that, what we will not get is we will not have the market in Europe, we will not have the infrastructure in Europe, we will not have what data spaces are meant to be, orchestration engines, transparency agents, efficiency engines for data, software, and cloud that create value, because nobody wants to share data. We want to make value out of it, create new products, generate new value, and this is happening on the marketplace and in the orchestration engine. And this is what we need to capture here. So bringing down the cost, creating this market through European procurement is absolute key to do the investment, European investment, and make the capital available here to create the infrastructures here. And enable the SMEs to build these large-scale, international, cross-country, cross-domain data spaces, which we need in Europe, because we are federated and we need to deal with it. And those we need to invest into networks and not the initial POCs or silos we created, but create a pan-European network. And that is my aim and my scale. When I look at data space initiatives, do you do that? Do you scale beyond your jurisdiction across Europe? Because that's what's really needed to create this digital single market we want to have. And SMEs will thrive in it because we have excellent people, risk-taking companies, but we need to ensure this level playing field.
Thank you, Kai. Let's go back then to Juanjo. Juanjo, Kai and Mario mentioned about the public procurement as a means, also Catherine, as a means to support SMEs and as a means to grow on the European technology production. So what are your thoughts about what do you think are the best instruments that the policymakers can use to work in this season too?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, there is something that we typically do wrong in Europe, and Spain is not an exception. That is, we sometimes do not take a look at the past and learn what worked and what was wrong. And I'll give two very concrete examples of things I believe we should think about and consider as reference. Look at what we did in Spain, and the two examples, by the way, are regarding Spain. If you think about all the investment that has been made using structural funds in infrastructures like the roads, like the airports, the trains, and so on and so forth, there has been huge investment and use of these structural funds doing procurement. And with this, we have been able to create champions that today are worldwide champions, companies like ACS, Ferrovial, and so on. And this was designed around creation of physical infrastructure. So first reflection is, why is not something like that going to work for digital infrastructures? Why we do not follow a similar model? Second thing, actually, for a kind of digital infrastructure, this really worked pretty well in Spain. Spain is the most advanced country in smart cities, and this is recognized worldwide. Last year, I was organizing a meeting of people from Singapore Smart Nation Initiative who asked me to organize a visit to Spain because they wanted to learn from the country which was most advanced. And do we know why this happened? Not just by chance. It was because several years ago, structural funds were used and they were given to a number of cities that were submitting projects how they could develop the idea of smart cities, but they were given these structural funds and asked to say, you have to bring additional funds and run a public procurement. And this suddenly created a market of, in these first years, of around 400 million. And when you create a market of 400 million euros, then the industry moves. The company says, okay, there is a market, there is an opportunity I want to capture. And there was competition. And well, I think from my perspective is that many of the cities that are out there are using fiber technologies, and because essentially the providers who were bringing solutions competing in these tenders decided to bring this, and they won against proprietary solutions and stuff like that and so on. And we have today companies in Spain that are making business around developing solutions and exporting them in other countries, in Latin America and Middle East, and so on and so forth, and rest of Europe, by the way. So I think these are things that were done in the past, and sometimes it's not about just learning about mistakes. It's about learning what you did well and replicate, which sometimes is what we forget. We love to start things from the scratch. I have the right idea and I will design it and bring from the scratch. Sometimes people in the past have done things well, so just replicate. Replicate that is copy that. Copy that, right? So it's a little bit my advice. Last question is, do not things that would be wrong, which would be to run a big public procurement for one single thing. Allow competition in this, organize procurement so that there is competition, because from that competition, the best solutions will come, the best open source infrastructure will succeed, and so on and so forth. There might be a temptation to run a very big tender for creating the infrastructure that will work for all data spaces. I don't want to mention some initiatives that some people may think about, which might be a bit wrong, because if that particular tender is won with the wrong solution, then you have a problem.
Thank you, Juanjo. This, I think, it resonates to me what you're saying also about something that it was mentioned before about like the technology needs the right time to market. So it's important also that we balance the technology and the market at the same time. And this also comes related to what Catherine was mentioning about the time it takes to create the data space governance. So that's why supporting the initiatives for enough period so that they actually become, grow and thrive, and then become an industry leader. So Catherine, what do you think is needed in season 2? We have, of course, many success stories. Some of them have been mentioned also by Juanjo, like smart cities. How do you think we can scale this into mature competitive projects? And how can large European tech companies help secure this sovereignty in this current situation?
Thank you. I will start by speaking about AI. Data is the oil of intelligence artificial. So to keep the sovereignty on data, we need to have sovereignty on AI services. And it has to be next to the data storage, of course. We know that having hardware sovereignty is very costly, but we can work on other components of AI to keep our data sovereignty. My vision on that is that there is 3 main points to address. The first one is the easiest one. It's data sets. Whatever it's data set. Whatever is the AI tool you are using, it will be trained on a data set. But do you know the content of this data set? Do you agree with the content? Very often it's all internet data set that was used. Do you understand the consequences it will have? It's not even the case. The second part is the AI mode. So previously I thought it was Mario who spoke about the vertical AI. For me, the vertical AI is the concept to build your own AI tools focused only on your needs. For example, if it's a company customer chat, you will use a tool that will use only the specific document repository that you want to be used with a specific large language model in the language you need. In this case, you will have high quality answers, and you will be also able, some tools allow to explain the answers to the customers if needed. So this is the second part. Vertical AI with not the general AI replying to every of your question, but focused on your need. And the last aspect is more hidden, but is really key for me. It's operation. It's not enough to host your data and AI services in your country. Depending on the operational model you choose, access to your data can be widely open to many suppliers. To achieve data sovereignty, you should also handle who might access your data. And it's very hidden in small technical detail most of the time. If I take the example of Orange Business, we developed an AI generative solution with sovereign services. It's called Live Intelligence Trust, with tools to build your solution most of the time kind of vertical AI, but for those who know a hard mode, for example, with your own document repository, with a large language model in French. This was brought by a startup, of course. And we add an operational model, enabling that only Orange and no other service provider, even the startup helping us, can't access your data, only Orange. So it's only bring by the operational model. So it's also a key point not mentioned yet. To also respond to your question, what is needed, in my point of view, still, what is needed is a market to reach, that will agree to pay an extra, to pay more for trust and sovereignty. The technology is available already, but the decision should be taken not only based on price, but also based on sovereignty. Otherwise, the market will remain too small, which is the case today. That was all for me.
Thank you, Catherine. Very interesting to balance all the European values and not only like the price. Definitely is something to consider. Anna, going back to you, what do you think is needed on season 2? There's been only a couple of weeks since the data union strategy was published. What do you think about that? How do you think the data union strategy connects data with the AI initiatives, and what do you think is about this?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, the data union was published. And personally, I was happy to see two things, talking about the context of what we are discussing today. One is that that consistency that I mentioned in the first round, like being consistent with investments, at least is there, because there was a risk that continuing the investments on data spaces was going to be out. Is seen, for me, that's fundamental, because everything we are talking about here today, I always have seen it like a long-term public-private collaboration. And it was a risk that was ending, and the data union was not going to mention that we still have to do a lot of work to make sure that what has been done in season 1 goes to season 2. But now the part that really touches us more is the topic of the data labs that, of course, have created a lot of, let's say, different emotions in different people. Since this was mentioned, I think it was in May 2024 that we started meetings already with the European Commission on this topic. And for us, why is this positive? Simply because it offers a framework to focus on how we connect the whole data ecosystem of the AI ecosystem, and allow us to put a focus more on the data services part connected with this topic that we need to do more in generating value with AI or without AI, but let's talk with AI. Clearly, I mean, it has a few pros and cons how these data labs have been set up from the policy perspective. I know many stakeholders in the community of data spaces, they claim that what is there already exists, and I don't disagree, I agree, but that's better. If already exists, we are already quite advanced, and the only thing we need to make sure is that is made available for what is needed. The risk that exists, and one of the reasons why I think the data labs were launched, it was just a timing issue. So many of the things that some people thought that it was going to be ready now, they are not ready. Like, I want to find the data. What is the data? I mean, you need to know where to go, who to speak. The technology sounds very, you need a master in data spaces, but then you need to know a lot of people to know to who to ask. You know? So what Kai was saying about the federation and that's needed, but because it's not there yet, someone needs to help to navigate that. No, that's the part that that is more a timing issue, but then there are other focus in many services. The thing is, those services are already identified time ago. Many people have built those services for many years. The technology exists. So again, it's just a question of package those. It has started with AI factories. That's good, there is a driver, and we could talk, but that also has a risk, because the first data labs are going to be, let's say, constructed with a mindset, a very particular mindset of what is needed for people that know better the computing side, and it's going to give a service to startups that sometimes don't know much about digital ecosystems. And if we might have a risk if we don't tap quickly, and that's a positive part also that the data union said, look, we start here, but immediately we do it anywhere. So that's, for instance, where we are starting to work now, to look at how those data labs out of the factories, and also looking at the companies that in the market now offer those services, because we need to avoid that this sounds like a function that is going to be always funded by the public sector. No, it's something for a purpose that now, well, there is not much money either anyway, but that is needed for a purpose. But if we look at, at what is needed with the gigafactories that Mario mentioned before, if we look at IPCI that has been set up, okay, well, how do we model there what somehow from the policy has been identified as an AI as a data lab? And here what we are going to do is identify companies, identify standards that still not exist, identify things that somehow we have been doing in different use cases, but that we could really leverage as a more capability to scale. So from that perspective, I see very positively. And just two things to close. Very positive also the topic that Mario mentioned and others about the industrial foundation models. And there, let's see whether we are able to build European models that are based on shared data. And that's, I know many people are working on it, and that's critical infrastructure, in my opinion, for sovereignty. And the second point, and finish with this, as I was talking about innovation in the first season, I mentioned a bit about that. Something that is super important, key technologies will be popping up all the time. New things, our technology goes so fast that we need to make sure, Daniel was saying at the very beginning, generative AI took us by surprise, although those ones that put it into the market were working for more than 10 years. But there are new things coming up all the time. So we need to have the mechanisms in our digital ecosystems to be able to innovate very quickly. And for instance, the AI spaces that we are collaborating with in BDVA, and some of the people behind AI spaces are here, are instruments that we need to keep investing in, and we should have one of these sandboxes in each of the digital ecosystems, of data ecosystems, because we need to make sure that those that are in the digital ecosystem have the capacity to innovate like this. As I said, the tech is there, but now let's keep giving that capacity to go very fast with any technological trend that will come in the years to come, in the next years. Thank you.
Many thanks, Anna. Barry, finally, so what do you think is needed? I know a lot has been said. What do you think about investments, about the different instruments that are needed? What do you think regulators could do to drive more interoperability and specifically to drive the business value?
Yeah. Yes, a very interesting question as well. And first of all, also really want to stress that AI is a very important factor to connect to the data space, I think. But first of all, I think and the perception is this whole data sovereignty. It's like an old oil tanker changing course, and so this takes time, but it also takes stamina, and so you have to stick to it. And I think that is really important. Being committed over a longer time is something we really have to pursue, because the benefits are not gonna be here overnight. The benefits are gonna take a while, but then they can last and be structural. There are 4 points I noted which I think is important to have a look at. First of all, I think we should create a more supportive environment for business growth and financial resilience for data space related initiatives. And we see they have a hard time surviving. And so we could look at funding for the unprofitable peaks after a pilot phase, stimulate cross-sectoral use or stimulate business development within those data spaces using cross-domain stimulus, using a data market stimulus. But also we need industry and government to explicitly carry this together. We need to evangelize the whole community that we're really committed. And that's, I think, a dual responsibility of both government and industry. It needs to be carried. Also interesting is what we see is that there's not much investment capital availability for this type of services. Most investment capital doesn't really understand this model or is hesitant to finance it. So we could also think about sovereign funds, which are co-funded by government and industry, to make sure that capital is available for data space initiatives. And so that supportive environment is one thing that we need to have a look at. On the other hand, the second point is that we need to, I think, enforce sovereignty in some way. And you can do that either by stimulating parties in tenders with sovereignty measures, getting bonus points, or making sure that you require, and that's the more restrictive part, and that you require compliance to standards. And that has to become a normal way of putting it in our tenders and putting into the procurement that we do both on government and on industry side. And I think that we're still at the early stages of doing that. So that's a second one. Enforcing it is very much needed. The third one, and this is more on the technology side, I think we can make a bigger effort on making things work as easy as possible. And so we have the building blocks, but putting it all together can be made much easier. And we also have to look at AI to help us in that. So setting up a data space, managing a data space, and making a data space more autonomous. AI is a very interesting factor, and that's actually also going to generate an ecosystem around AI and a chance around AI to work with data spaces. AI has also a disruptive potential on the whole data space arena and the way we perceive things, and that we need to follow, I think, because if AI can by itself generate interfaces between data sets, Why do we need data spaces? And this is something that is looming in the R&D world. So it's not there yet at all, but AI can help us making data space simpler, but it also could be a factor that the data space view can change over time, where AI is going to have a much more dominant role. And so that was the third, the tech one, putting things together more easily. I think the fourth one, and this has already been said many times, we need to make sure that the big application areas, that they stimulate using data space solutions as the preferred way to go. AI as the poster child, of course, because in the AI world, the approach to data is not at all aligned with the data space view at all. AI training requires you to really acquire and own the data at the moment. And who owns the most data has the biggest and best AI. But we need a different approach in Europe towards AI. So AI making use of data spaces, we need to make that function. It's really important. And it could make also a big difference, of course, in the success of AI and the structural success of AI. But it's not only AI. And another area that we see is digital product passports, which is also a big application area, which can or should heavily rely on data space technology. And if we do that right, that's also going to put us in the front seat on an application domain that requires data space technology. And so making sure that those fast-growing application areas adopt data space technology is, I think, the fourth thing that we really need to take into attention.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I mean, this has been a very inspiring session. I think there has been tremendous ideas, provocative, some of them, and also reality of where we are and what we have to do for the next phase. We are at the race. We want to be competitive and sovereign in Europe, and data space is an instrument to build it. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you very much, Kai, Catherine, Barry. Thank you very much to be with us. And of course, thank you, Mario, Ana, Juanjo.
Thank you.
And a special thank you to Ruth. Ruth, thank you very much to be able to come here. I know you have a lot of work. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you. And bueno, y nos han dejado unos mensajes súper interesantes, como Mario, que quiere que todos seamos conductores, todos los drivers. La importancia de las pymes y las startups. Gracias, Ana, por ser positiva. O sea, Ana nos ha traído por primera vez cosas positivas y nos ha dicho que somos los primeros en compartición de datos y en proveer datos. Y sobre todo, y Juanjo nos ha dicho también que tenemos que aprender del pasado. Y ya que hablamos de aprender, que no quería dejar de que percibáis dónde estamos. Estamos en una de las cunas del saber, ¿no? Estamos en la UPM, en la Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, porque queríamos estar con ellos. Sabemos que el saber es uno de los principios, ¿no? Podríamos haber elegido cualquier otro sitio, pero queríamos estar en la universidad y queremos agradecer a la UPM que siempre nos acoge. Aquí en la Escuela de Telecomunicaciones nos acoge siempre con muchísimo cariño y muchísimas gracias a la UPM. Muchísimas gracias por todo.